The first light of dawn spilled over the red mesas, painting the valley in hues of fire and dust. The air was still until the thunder of hooves broke it apart. 200 Apache warriors surrounded the small wooden cabin. Their horses snorted clouds of steam into the cold air. Their spears and bows caught the sunrise like blades of flame. At the center of that living storm stood a man alone. Royce Barrett had lived here for 3 years. 3 long years of silence, dirt, and waiting for ghosts that never came. He had learned to sleep with one eye open, to track the wind, to talk to the desert itself. But today, the desert had brought him something else, judgment. He stood at the cabin door unarmed. His rifle lay inside, forgotten. There was no point in reaching for it. Against 200 warriors, defiance would only make his death faster. Then he saw her. Amid the line of riders, a figure sat tall on a black horse, a young woman with braided hair. Her face marked by the faint ashes of war paint. Her eyes locked onto his, and time broke. He knew that face. For months ago, he had found her half-conscious in the canyon, surrounded by wolves. He had carried her to safety, tended her wounds, and when dawn came, she vanished, leaving only a silver necklace on the ground. Now she was here, and the necklace gleamed against her throat once more. The warriors shouted, circling closer. From the ranks rode an older man, his features carved from stone, his presence unshakable. The chief. He raised his hand, and silence fell like a blade. "You stand on sacred ground," the chief said, his voice echoing across the dust. "You take what is not yours. You build your walls where our ancestors rest." Royce didn't answer. His throat was dry, his heart beat loud. Behind the chief, the woman, Fiona, looked at him again. Just for a moment, and the message was clear. Say nothing. He nodded ever so slightly. The chief gestured. Spears were lifted, and in that split second, Royce realized the cruel irony of fate, that the only soul who might save him was now sworn to destroy him. The desert held its breath, and the sun climbed higher, casting long shadows over the man who stood alone against 200 hearts of vengeance. The circle around the cabin held firm as the first full light of morning struck the valley. The air shimmered with heat and dust, and every heartbeat felt like a drum before execution. Royce didn't flinch. He stood tall, his hands open, palms turned outward, a gesture of surrender, or maybe of defiance. The chief dismounted. His boots hit the ground with the sound of final judgment. He approached slowly, eyes sharp as obsidian. "You've been here 3 winters," he said in a calm, measured tone. 3 years of cutting our trees, drinking our water, and hunting our lands. Did you think the wind would not tell us? Royce's voice came low and steady. "I built where no one lived." The soil was empty. A murmur rippled through the warriors. The chief's brow furrowed. "Empty? There is no empty land. Every stone has a name. Every stream carries the memory of those who bled for it." Royce wanted to argue, to say that he meant no harm. But then his eyes found Fiona again. She shook her head almost imperceptibly. "Don't speak," the chief continued. "We found your traps near the sacred ridge. You claim ignorance, but the spirits do not forgive trespass." Royce drew a slow breath. "Then I'll make it right. Whatever I took, I'll return." A harsh laugh came from the crowd. One of the younger warriors stepped forward, bow drawn. "Return what cannot be touched. Return the silence you broke." Before the chief could respond, Fiona spoke, her voice clear, firm. "Let me question him, father." The chief turned sharply. "No, you will not." But she dismounted anyway. The warriors stepped aside, uncertain. Her presence carried both authority and rebellion, a storm contained within calm. Fiona stopped a few paces from Royce. "You built your home here alone. No tribe, no allies. Why?" Royce hesitated. He wanted to tell her the truth, that he came here to disappear, to escape the world that had long since lost its soul. But instead he said, "Because I wanted peace." "Peace," she repeated softly, almost to herself. "Then why does war follow you?" Before he could answer, A sound cut through the silence. Distant gunfire, faint but sharp. The warriors turned their heads. Horses stirred. The chief's expression hardened. They're near. Kiona's eyes widened. The white men. The chief nodded. The land takers. And for the first time, Royce saw fear, not for himself, but for them. Dust rose on the horizon, riders approaching fast, their silhouettes gleaming with rifles. The chief gave a sharp command. Warriors scattered to defensive positions. Kiona mounted her horse again, glancing down at Royce. "Stay alive," she whispered, "and maybe they'll listen to you later." The thunder of hooves grew louder. The desert was no longer silent. War was coming. The first shot cracked the stillness like lightning. A puff of smoke rose from the ridge, then another. The white riders burst into view, their rifles flashing in the morning sun. "Take cover," shouted one of the Apache warriors. The air exploded with the sound of gunfire. Royce dove behind a fallen beam as splinters tore through the walls of his cabin. Bullets hissed like angry hornets, kicking up dust and dirt. He grabbed his old Winchester from the porch, the same rifle he'd refused to touch moments ago. His hands trembled, but his eyes were steady. This time, he wasn't defending just himself. The chief barked orders in Apache, his warriors moving like shadows, spreading across the dunes with practiced precision. Arrows flew silent and deadly. A white rider fell from his horse. Another cried out, clutching his shoulder. Kiona rode past the cabin, hair whipping in the wind, bow drawn. She moved like fire, swift and fearless. Royce felt a surge of adrenaline. Without thinking, he ran toward her side, firing at the approaching riders. Behind the rocks, she shouted. They ducked together, bullets tearing through the sand above them. "You shouldn't be here," Royce yelled. She smirked, breathless. "Neither should you." They exchanged a glance, brief but electric, before both turned to fire again. The white riders pushed forward, shouting commands in English. "Get those papers. Don't let them burn it all." Royce froze. The land deeds. That's what they were after. The documents proving ownership, lies written on stolen ground. He sprinted back toward his cabin as bullets whizzed past. Inside, smoke and dust choked the air. The papers were in a tin box beneath the floorboards. He tore it open, grabbed the deeds, and stuffed them under his coat. A shadow fell across the doorway. One of the riders had followed him in. Royce swung the butt of his rifle, cracking the man across the jaw. The rider stumbled back, dropping his revolver. Royce fired once. The man collapsed. Outside, chaos reached. Flames licked the walls of the cabin. The desert wind turned the fire into a storm of sparks. Royce burst out into the open, clutching the papers. Kiona saw him and galloped forward. He threw the documents to her, shouting, "Keep them safe." She caught them just as an explosion rocked the valley. A powder keg ignited near the horses. Smoke swallowed everything in a rolling wave. When the dust settled, the remaining white riders were retreating. The chief raised his hand, signaling the warriors to cease pursuit. The battle was over. Royce stood in the ruins of his cabin, chest heaving, sweat and soot streaking his face. Round him, the warriors watched in silence. The chief approached slowly. "You fought for us," he said. "Why?" Royce looked at Kiona, the papers still clutched in her hand, her eyes burning with quiet strength. He exhaled. "Because your land was worth more than mine ever was." The sun had long fallen beyond the red cliffs when the drums began. Their deep rhythm echoed across the valley, slow, deliberate, and heavy with judgment. Royce stood in the center of the fire's circle, surrounded by warriors whose faces flickered in the firelight. The smell of smoke and sweat filled the air. He could feel the weight of every gaze upon him. His hands, bound in front of him, were raw from rope burns. The battle had ended, but his trial had just begun. The chief, Nishoba, stood before him, tall and composed, a carved staff in his hand. Beside him sat the council, 5 elders whose eyes seemed to pierce through the dark. "You fought with us," the chief began, his voice calm but distant. "But the question remains, why did you come here in the first place?" Royce hesitated. His throat felt dry as dust. I came to live quietly, he said, to build something with my own hands. The land seemed empty. A murmur rippled through the circle, a sound of quiet disapproval. Nishoba raised his hand for silence. Empty to you, but not to us. Royce lowered his gaze. I know that now. From the shadows, one of the elders spoke, his voice sharp like flint. You took land that belonged to our ancestors. You built your cabin over our sacred ground. Royce's chest tightened. I didn't know. Another elder leaned forward. The white men always say that. The tension was thick. Then, a sudden voice cut through the murmurs. Calm, clear, but filled with emotion. It was Kiona. She stepped into the circle, her chin high, her eyes unwavering. He didn't steal, she said. He fought for us. He saved the deeds the invaders tried to take. Without him, they would have claimed this land by sunrise. A silence followed, one heavy enough to stop even the drums. One of the elders frowned. You speak out of turn, daughter of Nishoba. I speak for truth, Kiona answered firmly. He could have fled, but he stayed. He fought beside us. That must mean something. Nishoba's expression didn't change, but his eyes flicked between his daughter and Royce, as if weighing a truth that couldn't be spoken aloud. Royce felt a strange mixture of shame and gratitude. He wanted to speak, but words failed him. The fire cracked, sending a shower of sparks into the night. Finally, Nishoba turned to the elders. Tomorrow, he said, we decide if this man remains or leaves our lands forever. The drums resumed, slower now, heavier. Two warriors took Royce by the arms and led him away. Kiona watched him go, her expression unreadable. But before he disappeared into the darkness, he heard her whisper, so quiet that only he could hear it. Don't give up. Not yet. Royce nodded faintly as they led him toward the shadows. For the first time, the frontier no longer felt empty. It felt like something worth fighting for, even if it cost him everything. The night was cold and silent. The fire in the center of camp had burned low, its last embers glowing like dying stars. Royce sat alone in a small pen made of wooden stakes, not bound, but not free. Above him, the desert sky stretched endless and merciless. He could still hear the distant drums echoing through the canyons, a heartbeat of the land itself. Tomorrow, at first light, the council would decide his fate. Some wanted him banished, others executed. He tried to rest, but every creak of the night made his pulse quicken. Coyotes cried in the distance. The smell of sage and ash lingered. He had faced bullets and fire before, but never this, the quiet fear of not belonging anywhere. A soft sound stirred the silence, the faint rustle of leather and sand. Royce turned his head. A shadow slipped between the tents. Then, in the moonlight, he saw her, Kiona. She moved swiftly, barefoot, her dark hair catching silver light. She held something in her hands, a small bundle wrapped in cloth. You shouldn't be here, he whispered. She smiled faintly. You said that before. Kiona knelt beside the fence, unwrapping the bundle. Inside was a piece of dried meat, a flask of water, and something else, a small pendant carved from bone. This belonged to my mother, she said quietly. She wore it when she faced her own trial before the council. It's a symbol of truth. Royce stared at it, unsure what to say. Why give it to me? Because truth doesn't always belong to one side, she answered. Tomorrow, they will test your heart, not your strength. Remember that. He looked down at the pendant, the moonlight reflecting on its smooth surface. I don't know your ways, he said softly. I'll probably fail, whatever trial they have planned. Kiona shook her head. You've already passed one. You stayed when you could have run. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt fragile, sacred. Somewhere in the distance, an owl cried. Royce met her gaze. Why are you helping me, Kiona? She hesitated, then looked away. Because when you fought beside us, you didn't look like an enemy. You looked like someone trying to remember who he is. The words struck deeper than he expected. He swallowed hard, fighting the weight in his chest. Finally, she stood, pulling her shawl tight around her shoulders. When the sun rises, they'll bring you before the fire again. Don't speak for yourself. Let your actions speak. She turned to go, her figure fading into the pale moonlight. Kiona, he called softly. She stopped, half-turned, her eyes glinting in the dark. If I survive this, he said, I'll never forget what you've done tonight. Kiona gave a faint, almost sad smile. Then survive, she whispered. That will be enough. The desert wind picked up, carrying her scent and the sound of her steps, until both vanished into the night. Royce held the pendant tightly in his palm. It was warm, as if still carrying her heartbeat. The dawn broke cold and gray. The desert was quiet, too quiet, as if even the wind held its breath. In the center of the camp, the council had gathered again. The fire pit from last night still smoldered, sending thin trails of smoke into the pale sky. Royce stood barefoot in the dust, his wrists unbound now but still heavy with the weight of what was coming. The chief faced him, surrounded by elders and warriors. Kiona stood behind them, her eyes calm but filled with something deeper, fear maybe, or faith. Nishoba raised his staff. Royce Barrett, he began, voice deep and measured. You came to our land without permission. You built on our sacred ground. But you also fought beside us and saved what others tried to destroy. The council has chosen a path of trial, not blood. He struck the ground once with his staff, and the echo rolled through the circle. You will face 3 trials, the chief continued. If your spirit is true, the land will know it. If not, it will cast you out. Royce nodded slowly. His voice, when it came, was steady. What's the first? The trial of the earth. Ishoba said. You must return to the valley where your cabin stood, the ground you took. There, you will bury the ashes of what you built. You must find the sacred spring and bring back the stone that lies beneath it. Only then will we know if the spirits forgive you. A murmur rippled through the warriors. The sacred spring was a place no outsider had ever been allowed to see. Kiona stepped forward. You'll need a guide, she said. Yishoba's gaze hardened. He needs no help. The spirits will judge him alone. Her jaw tightened, but she said nothing more. Royce looked toward the valley, a jagged horizon of rock and memory. The ruins of his cabin still smoked faintly in the distance. He took a deep breath, then turned back to the chief. When do I leave? Yishoba's eyes glinted in the morning light. Now. 2 warriors handed Royce a small clay urn filled with ashes, the remains of his home. He took it carefully, feeling its warmth still clinging to the surface. The air smelled of dust and cedar. As he stepped beyond the circle, the crowd parted in silence. No one spoke, no one moved. Only Kiona's eyes followed him, soft but steady, a silent promise that she believed in something greater than fear. Royce walked until the camp was just a shimmer behind him. The sun climbed higher, harsh and relentless. He moved through sand and stone, past charred wood and scorched earth, toward the valley where his past had burned away. When he reached the ruins, he stopped. The air was still thick with the scent of smoke. The place where he'd once lived now looked like a graveyard of memory. Blackened beams, melted iron, ashes drifting in the wind. He knelt, digging into the ground with his bare hands, and placed the urn gently into the soil. His voice was barely a whisper. I didn't know what this land meant, but I do now. The journey to the sacred spring took all day. By noon, the sun blazed mercilessly, turning the sand into fire beneath Royce's bare feet. His canteen was half empty, his lips cracked. The urn he had buried felt like a memory now, something heavy he had finally laid to rest. Ahead, the valley narrowed into a canyon. Shadows spilled down from the cliffs like ink, and the air grew cooler, quieter. Royce followed the faint path marked only by old stones and wine-carved symbols, signs left by hands centuries before him. The deeper he went, the more he felt the weight of the land pressing around him. It wasn't just silence, it was presence. Every gust of wind, every shifting grain of sand felt like something watching, waiting. By the time he reached the spring, the sun was low, and the canyon glowed gold and crimson. The water shimmered in a small basin of smooth rock impossibly clear, reflecting the dying light. He stopped awed. For a moment, he forgot why he had come. Then he saw it, a single flat stone at the bottom of the pool, carved with markings he didn't recognize. Royce knelt and dipped his hand into the water. It was cold, colder than it should have been. The chill ran up his arm like electricity. He reached deeper, but the stone seemed farther away than it looked. He leaned in, straining, until suddenly, his reflection shifted. It wasn't his face in the water anymore. It was his cabin, burning again. And behind it, the faces of the men he once rode with. The landowners who had tricked him into signing their papers. Their laughter echoed faintly through the canyon. Royce jerked his hand back, gasping. The vision faded. His pulse pounded in his ears. He closed his eyes, forcing himself to breathe. "This isn't real," he whispered. "It's the trial." When he looked again, the water was calm. He plunged his arm back in, ignoring the cold, the ache, the fear. His fingers brushed the stone. It was smooth, unnaturally so, like it had been shaped by more than water. As he lifted it, the surface shimmered faintly, and for an instant, the canyon seemed to sigh, a low, resonant hum that moved through the air and into his bones. The wind rose suddenly, carrying with it whispers, indistinct but urgent. He couldn't make out words, only emotion, grief, warning, forgiveness. He stood there, trembling, holding the stone against his chest. The whispers faded as quickly as they came. The desert fell silent again. Royce looked up at the sky, the first stars beginning to show through the fading light. He whispered, "If this is your land, then I walk it with respect." He turned to leave, but on the cliff above, a figure watched him. Kiona. She hadn't spoken, hadn't followed openly, but she had come anyway. The wind carried her voice faintly down the canyon. "Take it to my father," she called. "The spirits have seen you." Royce nodded. He felt the stone pulse faintly in his hand, as if alive. When Royce returned to the Apache camp, the night fires were already burning. The people stood in silence as he approached, dust-covered and exhausted, holding the sacred stone in his hands. The chief waited at the edge of the fire's circle, Kiona beside him, her expression unreadable. Royce knelt and placed the stone before Nishoba. "I found it," he said, voice hoarse but firm, "at the spring." The chief regarded it quietly, then looked at him. "And what did you see there?" Royce hesitated. "The truth," he said finally, "and the past I had to let go." A murmur rippled through the warriors. The chief nodded once, as if satisfied. "You have faced the earth," he said. "Now you will face the hunt." Royce frowned. "The hunt?" "The trial of courage," Ishoba continued. "Tomorrow, you will ride with our warriors into the northern reach. There, a mountain lion has begun hunting our herds. You will face it alone, kill it, or drive it away. The test will measure not your strength, but your heart." Royce nodded slowly. "When do we leave?" "Before sunrise," Ishoba said. "You will ride with my nephew, Taza. He will lead you to the hunting grounds." From the crowd, a tall, hard-eyed warrior stepped forward. His expression made it clear that he did not approve of this test, or of Royce's presence at all. Taza looked him up and down, then spat into the dirt. "If the spirits favor you, maybe they'll keep you from dying too quickly." Kiona shot Taza a sharp glance. "He doesn't need your mockery," she said. But Taza ignored her, turning and walking toward the horses. Nishoba raised his hand, ending the moment. "Rest now, both of you," he said to Royce and Kiona. "The dawn will decide what kind of man stands before us." The night stretched endlessly. Royce sat alone near a dying fire, sharpening the blade of his knife. Every sound in the darkness made him tense. The call of an owl, the whisper of the wind, the distant coyote's howl. He thought of the mountain lion, a creature of shadow and hunger, silent as the night itself. And for the first time since his trial began, he felt something that wasn't fear, but understanding. A figure approached quietly. It was Kiona. "You shouldn't be here," he said softly, a faint smile crossing his lips. She sat down beside him, wrapping her blanket around her shoulders. You said that before, she murmured. And yet, here I am again. They sat in silence for a long time, the flames painting her face in gold and amber. Finally, she spoke. The lion is not just a beast, she said. It's a spirit, a guardian of the mountains. You can't just kill it. You must make it understand you mean no harm. Royce looked at her, puzzled. And how am I supposed to tell that to a lion? Tiona smiled faintly. By surviving. He chuckled under his breath. You have a way of making things sound simple. Her eyes softened. It's not simple, but it's the only way. The first light of dawn spread across the desert, painting the sand in shades of gold and fire. Royce rode beside Taza through the cold morning wind. Neither man spoke. The only sounds were the rhythmic beats of the horses' hooves and the whisper of leather reins. They passed dry riverbeds, thorn bushes, and jagged rocks that cut the horizon like ancient scars. Royce could feel Taza's tension, not fear, but a sharp, restrained hostility. You don't trust me, Royce said finally. Taza's jaw tightened. Trust is earned, he said flatly. One trial doesn't make you one of us. Royce nodded. Then maybe this one will. Taza said nothing, but a faint smirk touched his lips. As the sun climbed higher, they reached the northern ridge, a place where the desert rose into sharp cliffs and narrow ravines. The air smelled of dust and cedar. Bones of cattle lay scattered among the rocks. Taza dismounted, crouching beside a set of paw prints in the dirt. He's close, he muttered. Big male, hungry. Royce knelt beside him, studying the tracks. We'll find him soon. Taza glanced at him, surprised by the calm in his voice. You've hunted before. Long ago, Royce replied, when I still thought every beast was my enemy. They followed the tracks into a narrow canyon. The air grew colder, the light dimmer. Suddenly, a low growl echoed from the shadows. The lion appeared, massive, golden, eyes burning like molten amber. Its muscles rippled beneath its fur as it stepped into the open, tail twitching. Taza raised his spear, but Royce held out a hand. Wait, he whispered. The lion's gaze fixed on him. It was not rage that Royce saw. It was pain, hunger, and the fierce will to live. Slowly, he lowered his rifle. Easy now, he murmured. I'm not here to steal your land. The beast growled louder, stepping closer. Taza shouted a warning, but Royce didn't move. Instead, he knelt, lowering his eyes, the gesture of respect. For a tense heartbeat, the canyon went silent. Then the lion stopped. Its growl faded into a deep rumble, and it turned, vanishing back into the shadows. Taza stared at Royce in disbelief. You let it go? Royce stood, brushing dust from his knees. No, he said quietly. It let me live. They began the long ride back to camp. Halfway through the canyon, a hawk appeared above them, circling once against the burning sky. Taza looked up. The sign, he whispered. The spirit saw you. Royce didn't answer. He only watched the bird disappear into the clouds, feeling something shift deep within him, not pride, but peace. When they returned to the village, the people gathered again around the central fire. Yishoba looked from Taza to Royce. Well, the chief asked. Taza stepped forward. He faced the lion, he said, and lived. But he didn't kill it. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Yishoba's expression was unreadable. The days after the hunt passed quietly, almost too quietly. Royce worked beside the Apache men, mending fences, helping the women carry water, sharing stories by the fire. For the first time since his exile began, he felt at peace. The people no longer looked at him with suspicion. Some even greeted him by name. Tiona smiled more now, her laughter soft and rare like rain in the desert. Sometimes, in the fading light, she would watch him from across the camp as he helped the children carve small wooden animals. In those moments, the distance between them seemed to vanish. But peace in the desert never lasts. One evening, as the sun bled into the horizon, Taza rode into the village at full gallop, his horse lathered with sweat. He leapt down before the chief's tent. "Riders," he said breathlessly. "White men, soldiers, or settlers, I can't tell. They're armed, headed this way." A murmur spread through the camp. Women clutched their children. Warriors reached for their weapons. Chief Nishoba stepped forward, his face grave. "How many?" Taza swallowed hard. "At least 20? The chief turned to the people. "Prepare the camp, hide the young. Call the council." Royce stood still, heart pounding. He knew what this meant. The same kind of men who had once ridden with him, men who saw land as property, not as life. Kiona approached him, voice low. "Will you fight them?" Royce hesitated. "If I do, I'll be killing men I once called my own." "Then don't fight for them," she said softly. "Fight for us." Those words struck him harder than any weapon. As darkness fell, the council gathered around the great fire. Flames danced on the faces of warriors, their eyes reflecting both fear and fury. Nishoba's voice cut through the murmurs. "These riders come to take what is not theirs," he said. "We will not surrender our home. But the spirits demand more than strength. They demand unity." All eyes turned to Royce. The chief stepped closer, studying him in silence. "You have walked our trials, faced our earth, our beasts, and our hearts," Nishoba said. "Now you will face the storm. If you wish to be one of us, you must defend us." Royce looked around the circle, at Taza, still bruised but nodding faintly, at Kiona, her eyes glimmering with pride and fear, at the children hiding behind their mothers. "I will stand with you," he said finally. A murmur of approval swept through the crowd. The chief lifted his staff toward the fire. "Then the spirits shall watch over us all," Nishoba declared. Thunder rumbled in the distance, low rolling, like the earth itself preparing for war. The warriors began to paint their faces with red and black clay, whispering prayers under their breath. Royce followed Kiona to the edge of camp, where the sky burned with lightning far away. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "don't forget what you've become here." He reached for her hand but stopped, afraid to break the fragile moment. "And what's that?" Her eyes met his. "One of us?" The storm broke with thunder and gunfire. From the ridge, Royce saw torches flickering like fireflies in the valley, riders advancing fast. The Apaches moved swiftly, blending into the rocks, their war cries rising into the night. Taza shouted orders while Chief Nishoba stood tall, unshaken. Royce gripped his revolver, heart pounding. When the first shot rang, he fired back without hesitation. Dust exploded. Horses screamed. Chaos erupted. Among the attackers, a familiar voice shouted his name. "Barrett, I knew you'd crawl back here." It was Calder, the land agent who had betrayed him years ago. He sat on horseback, grinning like a vulture. "You don't belong with them," Calder yelled. "Walk away, and I'll let you live." Royce rose from cover, firelight painting his face. "You already took my life once," he said. "This time, I'm taking it back." Gunfire cracked again. Royce hit one of Calder's men, then dove for cover as bullets shattered the stones. The Apaches pressed forward, arrows slicing the air. Thunder rolled across the desert, mingling with screams. Then Royce saw two riders break away, galloping straight toward the camp. Kiona stood there, protecting the children. Without thinking, Royce ran. He crashed through the smoke, jumped onto one of the riders, and pulled him from the saddle. The man swung a knife. Royce caught his wrist, turned, and slammed him down. The blade fell into the sand. The last of the gunfire faded. The attackers fled, leaving silence and smoke. As the storm drifted away, dawn began to bloom, soft and gold. Chief Nishoba approached, his face solemn but proud. "You fought not for blood," he said, "but for life. The spirits have seen you." Royce lowered his gun. "I didn't fight for the spirits," he said quietly. "I fought for her, for all of you." Kiona stepped closer, her eyes bright in the morning light. "You found where you belong," she whispered. He smiled faintly. "I just followed the hawk." Above them, a lone bird circled high, silent, endless, free. As the sun rose over the desert, the fire's last embers faded, and the land breathed again. Royce Barrett was no longer an outsider. He had become part of the story of the earth, the wind, and the people who called it home. The sun beat down on the cracked land as Boone Whitmore stepped off the wagon. Dust swirled around his boots, each gust whispering a reminder that he was alone now. No debts, no promises, no one to answer to. The paper in his hand crinkled with every breath of wind. The deed, his land, 500 acres of silence. But the silence didn't last. From the porch of a weathered farmhouse came the low thud of boots. 3 sets, deliberate and in sync. Boone froze. Out of the shadow stepped 3 figures, each woman taller than any man he'd ever met. Their frames were carved from work and weather, shoulders broad, arms taut with strength, sun painting every contour of muscle and grace. The first spoke, her voice deep as a canyon. "You must be Whitmore." Boone swallowed. "That's right. I bought this place fair from the bank." The second woman crossed her arms, the movement, flexed cords of strength under her sun-browned skin. "Bought it, sure. But you didn't read the fine print." Boone frowned, gripping the deed tighter. "What fine print?" The third woman smiled. Unlike the others, her tone carried something almost teasing. "Marcus Vance promised us partnership, work, profit, and companionship." She stepped closer. Boone had to tilt his head back to meet her eyes. When he vanished, that promise passed to whoever owned the deed. The desert wind pushed at Boone's hat as the 3 women drew into the light. Helena, Ruth, and Magdalene. They looked like the land itself, strong, unforgiving, alive. Helena pointed at the barn. "You want to stay. You'll work with us, live with us, share everything." Ruth added, "Everything means everything." Boone's breath caught. "You can't be serious." Magdalene's smile deepened. "Oh, we are." The deed suddenly felt heavier than it should have. Boone looked from one woman to the next, their eyes sharp and assessing, yet not cruel. He had come for solitude, and instead, he had found 3 storms waiting for him. And somewhere, behind the tension, under the weight of dust and heat, something in him stirred, a sense that his quiet life had just ended before it even began. The morning came heavy and golden. Boone woke to the scent of smoke and bread. Someone was cooking outside. Through the cracked window, he saw Helena chopping wood, her arms moving like the pistons of a machine, each swing deliberate and sure. Ruth was hauling 2 heavy buckets from the well, her stride wide and confident, while Magdalene brushed a horse by the fence, murmuring softly to calm it. Boone hesitated before stepping outside. He wasn't sure what to say, or even how to stand in front of them without feeling out of place. The air carried a tension he could almost taste, a mix of dust, heat, and unspoken history. "Morning," he finally said, tipping his hat. Helena didn't answer. Her eyes stayed fixed on the woodpile. "You're standing on someone else's land, stranger." Boone raised his deed. "Bought this place from the county clerk. Got the papers right here. It's mine fair and square." Ruth stopped walking, her eyes sharp, and a grin spread across her face. "Then you bought yourself 3 women and a mountain of trouble." Boone frowned. "I didn't sign up for that." Magdalene stepped forward, voice calm but firm. "Marcus Vance made a deal before he left. A deal that tied this land, and us, to whoever bought it next." Boone blinked. "Marcus Vance? The banker?" "Same one," Helena said, finally lowering her axe. "He called it a partnership. We called it survival. But he ran off, left us holding everything together." Boone looked from one to the other, realizing that whatever he thought he'd bought, this wasn't it. The women weren't squatters or trespassers. They belonged here. The ground itself seemed to respond to their presence. "So, what's your part in all this?" he asked quietly. Helena's gaze didn't waver. "You own the land, but you don't own us. You can leave now, or you can stay and work. If you stay, you share the sweat, the risk, and the reward." Boone's heartbeat slowed. There was pride in her voice, not defiance, but something older, harder. He nodded slowly. Then maybe we start with work. Ruth smirked. We'll see if you last till sundown, cowboy. Boone followed them to the barn. The day had begun, and though he didn't yet know the rules, he knew he was in the right place to learn them. By noon, Boone's shirt was drenched in sweat. The sun punished everything it touched. The earth cracked beneath his boots, and the shovel bit into the ground like a blade against bone. Ruth worked beside him, her hands moving twice as fast, her laughter echoing across the field. City hands, she teased, tossing him a canteen. You're gonna blister before you earn lunch. He took a long drink, trying not to show exhaustion. You always talk this much when you work. Only when someone needs humbling, she replied, grinning. Inside the corral, Helena was fixing the fence alone, silent, focused. Every nail she drove into the wood landed with a rhythmic, controlled force. Magdalene moved between them, checking on the animals, her presence softer but no less commanding. Boone caught himself watching them. The three worked like parts of the same machine: strength, precision, balance. He had seen soldiers less disciplined than these women. By sunset, the ranch looked alive again. The windmill creaked, the fences stood firm, and the smell of stew filled the air. The women gathered on the porch, faces glowing with the warmth of the firelight. Boone joined them, his body aching but his pride intact. Helena handed him a bowl of food. Not bad for your first day, she said. Didn't quit, didn't complain. Boone smiled faintly. Didn't have much choice. Ruth leaned back in her chair. That's where you're wrong. Most men would have run by now. Magdalene added softly, but you stayed. Maybe it means something. Boone looked out across the land, their land. The stars were beginning to rise, one by one, above the black silhouette of the barn. He realized that for the first time in years, he didn't feel alone. Helena met his gaze, her voice quiet but steady. Tomorrow, we start early. We'll see if you're still standing by noon. Boone chuckled, nodding. Wouldn't miss it. And as the night settled over the ranch, a strange calm filled the air, a truce, a beginning, and perhaps something deeper neither dared to name. The days began to blend together, sunrise, sweat, dust, and the rhythmic creak of the windmill turning above the dry plains. Boone learned quickly that there were no easy hours on this land. Every nail he drove, every bucket he carried, seemed to test the very limits of his endurance. Helena worked beside him without pause. She was a wall of focus, silent, deliberate, and tireless. Boone noticed how her muscles flexed under the sun, how her movements carried both precision and grace. She rarely spoke, but when she did, her voice carried a strange calm that made him want to listen. Ruth was fire and laughter. She teased him constantly, sometimes pushing, sometimes testing, like she was trying to find out what kind of man he really was. You think this land bends easy for strangers? She asked one afternoon, watching him struggle with a water pump. Boone spat out dust and grinned through exhaustion. I think it'll bend before I do. That earned him a sharp, approving smile. Good. Marcus used to say that too, right before he quit. Magdalene was different. Where Helena led with strength and Ruth with challenge, Magdalene carried a quiet wisdom. She moved through the ranch like a steady rhythm, soft-spoken but essential. When Boone's blisters broke and blood marked the handle of his shovel, she wordlessly wrapped his hands in clean cloth. He tried to thank her. She only smiled. You'll learn. This land doesn't take from you, it shapes you. By the fifth day, Boone's muscles ached so badly he could barely lift his arms. Yet, when dawn came, he rose anyway. Something about their rhythm, their unity, drew him in. At sunset, Helena stood by the corral, her figure outlined against the orange sky. Boone joined her, handing over a canteen. You're not bad, she said finally, without looking at him. I'm still standing, he answered. Helena's lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. For now, they stood in silence, the kind that meant more than words, the kind that carried respect, and maybe the beginning of something neither dared to name. That night, A storm rolled over the plains. Lightning flashed across the dark sky, illuminating the ranch in brief, violent bursts. The wind howled through the cracks of the wooden walls, and the horses screamed from the corral. Boone ran outside barefoot, fighting the rain and mud. The windmill was turning too fast. One of its blades cracked, threatening to tear loose. He grabbed a rope and started climbing, but Helena's voice cut through the storm. "Boone, get down." He ignored her. The metal shrieked above his head. Then suddenly, she was there, Helena soaked, her hands gripping the frame beside him. Together they wrestled the blade down, muscles straining, rain blinding their eyes. When the storm finally passed, they collapsed near the barn, gasping for air. The rain had turned the ground to mud, their clothes heavy and clinging. Boone looked at her, laughing weakly. "You always this stubborn." Helena brushed her wet hair back. "You're one to talk." For the first time, she laughed, a short, low sound that carried warmth instead of challenge. Boone felt something stir inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Connection, trust, maybe even admiration. Ruth appeared from the doorway, holding a lantern, water streaming from her shoulders. "You two done flirting or fixing?" she shouted over the rain. Helena threw a wet rag at her, chuckling. Boone could only shake his head, smiling despite himself. Later that night, inside the cabin, they sat near the fire for souls bound by land, weather, and exhaustion. The storm had tested them, but it had also welded something unspoken between them. Boone glanced at Helena. She met his eyes for just a second before turning away, but that second said enough. The land had begun to change him, not through ownership, but through belonging. The morning after the storm broke like a soft sigh across the valley. Steam rose from the wet earth, and the sky was washed clean and deep, endless blue that seemed almost new. Boone stepped out of the cabin barefoot, his shirt clinging damply to his shoulders. The smell of wet wood hay and smoke hung in the air. Behind him, he heard movement, the slow, grounded steps of Helena, her shadow falling over him like the shade of a mountain. She said nothing, only handed him a tin cup of coffee. Her eyes, usually sharp and unreadable, lingered a moment longer than usual. "You fixed that? Windmill like you've lived here your whole life," she said finally, her voice rough but low, like gravel stirred by wind. Boone smiled faintly. "Didn't have much of a choice. The wind was trying to take it apart faster than I could put it back." Helena's lips curved, a trace of humor. "That's how this place tests you." Ruth emerged next, carrying a bundle of tools, her bare arms gleaming bronze in the morning sun. She passed him without a word, but the corner of her mouth twitched upward as if acknowledging something quietly understood. Magdalene followed slower, quieter, her long black hair still wet, her eyes calm but thoughtful. Boone noticed the way she looked at the horizon before speaking. "We kept the animals safe," she said softly. "They trust you now." Boone exhaled, realizing he hadn't even thought of that. "Guess that makes me one of them." They worked most of the morning repairing fences and cleaning the stables. Every time Boone lifted something heavy, one of the women was there, stronger, faster, and more precise. It humbled him. These weren't women shaped by vanity or charm. They were carved by survival. And yet, in the quiet rhythm of their movement, there was something graceful, almost sacred. By noon, they rested in the shade of the corral. Helena sat with her back against a post. Ruth lay stretched out in the grass, and Magdalene carved small lines into a piece of wood, symbols Boone didn't recognize. When he asked, she smiled faintly. "It's a mark of renewal," she said. "We make it after storms. It reminds us what we survived." Boone nodded slowly, staring at the soft, intricate curves in the wood. "Then I'll remember it too." For the first time since he'd come to this ranch, the silence between them wasn't heavy. It was full alive. And somewhere in that stillness, Boone realized something had changed. He wasn't just fixing their land anymore. He was becoming a part of it. That night, the desert sang again. Crickets, wind, the faraway howl of coyotes. all stitched together like the heartbeat of the plains. Inside the cabin, firelight trembled across the wooden walls. The three women sat around the table, their silhouettes massive and golden in the flicker. Boone entered quietly, carrying a pot of coffee. Helena spoke first, her tone measured. "You've been here a while now. You've seen how we live." Boone nodded, pouring into tin mugs. "You built something that works, even out here where nothing's supposed to." Helena leaned forward, her expression unreadable. "Then you understand what we offer isn't pity or charity. It's partnership. Equal hands, equal risk." Magdalene looked up from her carving, her voice barely above a whisper. "You still think you're the owner of this land?" Boone met her gaze. "I paid for it, yes, but it doesn't feel like it's mine." Ruth laughed, not cruelly, but with warmth that filled the room. "Then maybe you're learning faster than most men." The room grew quiet again. Boone could feel their eyes on him, not testing, not hostile, but waiting. Helena broke the silence. "Marcus Vance promised us a contract, not a prison. We worked for this land, bled for it. When you bought it, you bought more than dirt, you bought a promise. If you want to stay, you stay as one of us, not above us." Boone set his cup down slowly. His hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the weight of something real, something he hadn't felt in years. He looked at each of them, Helena's strength, Ruth's fire, Magdalene's quiet wisdom, and realized this wasn't a negotiation. It was an invitation. Outside, thunder rolled faintly again on the horizon. Inside, Boone said quietly, "Then I'll stay, but not as your owner, as your equal." Helena's lips curved, the faintest, rarest smile. "Then welcome home, Boone." The following weeks passed in a rhythm Boone had never known before. The ranch breathed alive with the sound of axes, laughter, and the faint hum of life rebuilding itself. He woke to the scent of coffee and wet soil, to the low voices of women who had shaped this land long before him. And every day he learned to see them not as mystery, but as truth. Helena was the first to test him. She brought him to the north pasture, where a fallen oak blocked the cattle path. "We don't use saws here," she said, tossing him an axe. "We split it the way we always did, with sweat." Boone caught it midair, nodded, and got to work. The wood was dense, the sun merciless, and Helena watched him in silence. Each swing echoed through the hills like thunder. When at last the tree split, Boone's breath came in ragged gasps. Helena's lips curled in a rare, approving smirk. "Good," she said. "Now you're not just staying here, you're earning it." Ruth, meanwhile, tested his courage. One afternoon she challenged him to ride the wild black mare that had thrown every hand before him. "If you're part of this ranch," she said, tightening the reins, "you ride with us, not behind us." The horse screamed, fighting the bit. Boone mounted anyway, his jaw set, his eyes fixed ahead. The animal bucked like fury, hooves striking dust and sunbeams. Boone held on, his grip white-knuckled, his body one motion with the beast. When at last it slowed, Ruth's laughter split the air, low, proud, genuine. "Maybe you're not as fragile as you look." Magdalene didn't test him with strength, but with silence. She would sit by the fire at dusk, whittling small figurines while Boone mended tools. Without looking up, she asked questions that went deeper than the others ever dared. "Do you miss the world out there?" "Not much," he'd reply, eyes still on his work. "And if you had the chance to leave again?" Boone's hands paused. "I think I already did." The days blurred into nights, each one softer than the last. They ate together, worked together, and little by little, the air between them grew lighter. The ranch began to bloom again. Fences mended, cattle fed. The windmill spun steady, its song a low hum of promise. But beneath the peace, Boone could feel something stirring, a current of tension too quiet to name. It lived in the glances that lingered too long, and the laughter that came too easily. Trust had been earned, but something more was beginning to grow, and none of them quite knew what to do with it. The heat came early that summer, dry, relentless, pressing against the earth like a slow heartbeat. Boone worked shirtless in the corral, sweat tracing lines across his skin. From the porch, Helena watched with her arms crossed, her expression unreadable. Beside her, Ruth leaned on the railing, grinning. "He's learning fast," she said. Helena's gaze didn't shift. Maybe too fast. That night, the ranch glowed with lanterns and laughter. Ruth had managed to trade with travelers passing through whiskey, cloth, and a new gramophone that crackled with old country songs. They drank from tin cups and let the music drift into the dry wind. Boone sat by the fire, the golden light flickering across his face. When Magdalene joined him, "You're quiet tonight," she said. Boone smiled faintly. "Listening. To what?" "The sound of belonging. Didn't think I'd hear it again." Ruth laughed from across the fire. "You talk too pretty for a cowboy," she teased, tossing a peanut shell at him. Boone chuckled. "Guess I've had time to think." Helena poured another round, her deep voice cutting through the warmth. "Then think on this. Trust is a hard thing out here. Easier to lose than water." Boone met her gaze across the flames. "Then I'll hold it tight." The fire cracked, throwing sparks into the night. Music hummed low, soft and human. Boone leaned back, looking at the three women, strong, scarred, alive, and for the first time, he didn't see them as strangers or tests. He saw family, a wild, impossible kind of family built not from blood, but from fire, work, and choice. When the night grew quiet, Helena rose and spoke, not loud, not commanding, but steady. "Tomorrow," she said, "we ride to the East Ridge. There's something you need to see." Boone nodded, though a flicker of unease twisted in his gut. Something in her tone felt like the edge of a blade. As the others went inside, Boone stayed by the dying fire, the stars burning bright above him. Whatever waited at the ridge, he knew it would decide more than just his place on the ranch. It would decide his future among them. The sky over the valley cracked open like an old wand. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, thick as gun smoke. The air smelled of rain and electricity. A storm was coming. Boone stood on the porch, one hand resting on the post, watching the cattle grow restless in the fields. He'd learned enough about this land to know it wasn't just rain that worried him. It was what storms brought: broken fences, flooding creeks, and the kind of silence afterward that carried loss. Helena was already saddling her horse, her broad shoulders glistening with the first drops of rain. "We need to bring the herd in," she barked. Boone nodded and grabbed his slicker. Ruth and Magdalene appeared from the barn, ropes in hand, their faces set and ready. They didn't hesitate. They never did. Lightning flashed, painting the ranch silver for a heartbeat. The four of them rode out into the storm. Wind howled through the grass like a living thing. Boone's hat flew off, rain stinging his face, but he pushed on, shouting over the thunder. The herd was scattering, frightened by the roar of the sky. Ruth swung her lasso with perfect aim, her muscles straining as she dragged a runaway steer back toward the corral. Magdalene moved with quiet precision, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. Helena rode closest to Boone, shouting over the storm. "You're holding up better than I thought, cowboy," she teased. Boone grinned through the rain, heart pounding from the thrill of survival beside her. He felt smaller next to her, not weak, but human, part of something larger than himself. Hours passed in flashes of light and mud. Together, they fought the storm like soldiers in a war. When the last steer was safe and the corral gate slammed shut, they stood in the pouring rain, breathing hard, drenched to the bone, and laughing. Helena's hand landed heavy on his shoulder. "You did good, Boone," she said, her voice softer than the thunder. He smiled, not answering, because words didn't belong in that kind of silence, the kind that came only after survival. The sky over the valley cracked open like an old wand. Dark clouds rolled in from the west, thick as gun smoke. The air smelled of rain and electricity. A storm was coming. Boone stood on the porch, one hand resting on the post, watching the cattle grow restless in the fields. He'd learned enough about this land to know it wasn't just rain that worried him. It was what storms brought: broken fences, flooding creeks, and the kind of silence afterward that carried loss. Helena was already saddling her horse, her broad shoulders glistening with the first drops of rain. "We need to bring the herd in," she barked. Boone nodded and grabbed his slicker. Ruth and Magdalene appeared from the barn, ropes in hand, their faces set and ready. They didn't hesitate. They never did. Lightning flashed, painting the ranch silver for a heartbeat. The four of them rode out into the storm. Wind howled through the grass like a living thing. Boone's hat flew off, rain stinging his face, but he pushed on, shouting over the thunder. The herd was scattering, frightened by the roar of the sky. Ruth swung her lasso with perfect aim, her muscles straining as she dragged a runaway steer back toward the corral. Magdalene moved with quiet precision, her calm voice cutting through the chaos. Helena rode closest to Boone, shouting over the storm. "You're holding up better than I thought, cowboy," she teased. Boone grinned through the rain, heart pounding from the thrill of survival beside her. He felt smaller next to her, not weak, but human, part of something larger than himself. Hours passed in flashes of light and mud. Together, they fought the storm like soldiers in a war. When the last steer was safe and the corral gate slammed shut, they stood in the pouring rain, breathing hard, drenched to the bone, and laughing. Helena's hand landed heavy on his shoulder. "You did good, Boone," she said, her voice softer than the thunder. He smiled, not answering, because words didn't belong in that kind of silence, the kind that came only after survival. The desert had a sound of its own, a low hum carried by the wind, whispering through the canyons of New Mexico. For 14 months, Royce Barrett had lived beneath that endless sky, trading goods, learning words he once thought impossible to pronounce, and sharing firelight with the people who had slowly stopped calling him foreigner. But among all faces, one had changed his life forever: Fiona, daughter of the respected elder Tazi. Her laughter was as soft as wind through pine needles, her eyes dark as obsidian. Against every rule, against her Uncle Nolan's warnings, she had chosen him. Their wedding had been small, hidden under the stars, witnessed only by fire and silence. Royce thought peace had found him. Yet peace never lasts long when two worlds collide. It began with a rumor, a sacred place defiled, a silver talisman missing from the tribe's most revered shrine. The whispers reached Nolan Graves first. He had never trusted Royce, not for his pale skin, not for his strange tongue, and least of all, not for daring to touch Apache blood. When they came for him, Royce was repairing a broken saddle by the fire. The circle of warriors that surrounded him didn't need words. Their silence was a sentence. "You desecrated the spirit's ground," Nolan's voice cut through the air, sharp as flint. "You took what is not yours." Royce's hands trembled, not from guilt, but from disbelief. "That's a lie," he said quietly. "I would never." A blow silenced him. His tools scattered into the dust. From a distance, Fiona screamed his name, but the men held her back. She struggled, her cries echoing through the camp, pleading with her uncle to listen. But the council had already been summoned. That night, Royce sat bound beneath the moon, his wrists raw from the rope, watching shadows dance across the cliffs. The firelight painted his face in gold and blood. He thought of Fiona, of how she had taught him their words, their songs, their stories. He had tried to belong. He had tried to be worthy of her world. Now that same world wanted him dead. Somewhere beyond the circle of firelight, Fiona knelt before her father's tent, begging for mercy, her tears falling into the dust. The wind carried her whispers away, words of love, of faith, of desperate defiance. Tomorrow, the tribe would gather. The council would decide his fate. And in that moment, as the desert wind rose around him, Royce understood one thing: love was never enough when the weight of tradition demanded a sacrifice. The morning came in silence. A thin mist drifted above the canyon floor, and the smell of burned sage filled the air, a sign that the spirits had been called to witness what would happen that day. Royce Barrett stood between two warriors. His wrists bound, the ropes cutting deep into his skin. The people of the tribe gathered in a wide circle, their faces carved by the desert wind. He had faced many markets, many men, but never a moment like this. Before him stood the council, 5 elders in traditional garments, each holding a small carved stone, a symbol of judgment. Behind them, the sacred fire burned. Its smoke rose into the pale sky, twisting like a serpent between this world and the next. Kiona was not among them. She was forbidden to attend, locked away in her tent under guard. Yet Royce felt her presence, like a heartbeat he could not see but knew was there. Nolan Graves, her uncle, stepped forward. His voice carried authority, his words sharp as a blade. "This man," he said, "has lived among us under the guise of friendship. He took the trust of our people and spat upon it. The spirits of the sacred canyon have been violated. He must answer to the old laws." The crowd murmured in agreement, not out of hatred but fear. Fear of dishonoring the ancestors, of angering the unseen. Royce looked up. "I did not take anything," he said, his voice steady. "You all know me. I've traded fairly. I've shared your food, your stories, your nights by the fire." Nolan's eyes narrowed. "You speak well, white man, but words do not clean a soul." He turned to the elders. "The silver talisman of the mountain spirit is gone. It disappeared the same night he visited the shrine. Does coincidence hide guilt?" Royce tried to speak again, but the elder in the center, old Tazi, Kiona's father, raised his hand. The air grew still. His face, once kind, now carried the weight of both love and law. "The spirits demand truth," Tazi said quietly, "but truth does not always come with words. There is a way, an ancient way, to let the spirits decide." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Everyone knew what that meant. The right of contest, a trial of faith, courage, and endurance. Few dared to invoke it. Nolan's face hardened. "The contest is not for outsiders," he said. "It is sacred to our blood." But the elder looked past him at Royce. "He has lived among us. He has taken one of our daughters. If his heart is true, the spirits will protect him. If not..." His voice trailed off into the wind. The verdict would come with the next sunrise. Royce would face the trials, 3 challenges, drawn from the oldest traditions of the Apache, and if he failed even one, his blood would fall upon the desert sand. As the crowd dispersed, Nolan approached him, leaning close enough that only Royce could hear. "You should never have come here," he hissed. "She will forget you. The tribe will remember only your shame." The sun was falling behind the red cliffs when the elders gathered once more. The wind had turned cold, carrying the smell of sage and dust. In the center of the camp, a sacred circle was drawn in the sand, marked with ash and stone. It was here the ancient rite would begin. 3 challenges, 3 trials of truth. The first would test the body, the second, the mind, the third, the spirit. Royce stood before the circle, his wrists now free but red and raw. His shirt was torn, his skin marked by rope and sun. Across the crowd, he caught a glimpse of Kiona. She had broken free from her guards, and now she stood beside her father, eyes glistening with fear and pride. Old Tazi stepped forward, raising his staff. "The right of contest has been spoken. The spirits will see if this man's heart is clean. If he fails, the desert will take him. If he endures, he will walk among us as one of our own." The first trial began. 2 warriors stepped into the ring with him, bare-chested, painted for ceremony. They were not his enemies. They were the test. Royce had to withstand their blows without striking back. Endurance, not aggression. The lesson of the body. The drums began slow, deep, like thunder rolling through the canyon. The first warrior struck him in the chest, knocking him to the ground. Dust filled his mouth. The second pulled him up by the collar and struck again. The crowd watched in silence, the rhythm of the drums rising with every blow. Royce staggered but did not fall. He stood bleeding, his breath ragged, his eyes fixed on Kiona. She was crying now. whispering his name, words lost in the roar of the drums. When it was over, he collapsed to his knees, but he had not fought back. The first trial was done. The second began at nightfall. They led him to the canyon's edge, where a small stone altar stood beneath the moon. Before him lay 3 sacred objects: a feather, a knife, and a bowl of water. He was told to choose one and explain its meaning to the tribe. The choice that would reveal his spirit. Royce hesitated. The wind howled through the canyon, carrying the whispers of the past. He thought of what Kiona had taught him, that water is life, that the knife cuts both ways, that the feather touches the heavens. He reached for the feather. The knife divides, he said softly, and water flows away. But the feather rises. It carries prayers to where truth lives. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the elder nodded. He remembers. The second trial was complete. As the crowd dispersed for the night, Kiona approached, breaking the rules of the rite. She knelt beside him, touching his face with trembling hands. "You can still run," she whispered. "They would never find you in the northern hills." Royce looked into her eyes. "And leave you behind?" He smiled weakly. "No, if I die, I'll die in the place you taught me to love." She kissed his forehead and slipped away into the darkness before the guards saw her. The dawn rose red, the color of blood and rebirth. A chill clung to the canyon floor as the tribe gathered for the final trial. Even the wind seemed to hold its breath. Royce stood at the edge of the sacred cliffs, his body bruised and trembling. He hadn't slept. The memory of Kiona's touch still lingered on his skin, her words echoing in his mind like the fading rhythm of the drums. This last trial was called the Path of Shadows. It was not a contest of strength or wit. It was a walk into the unknown, a journey meant to strip a man bare before the spirits. Those who lied, those whose hearts were false, would never return. Old Tazi approached, his staff glowing with the soft orange light of sunrise. "This path is not walked by the body," he said. "It is walked by the truth within you. If you have hidden lies, they will devour you. If you are pure, the spirits will show you the way back." Royce nodded slowly. "And if I return, then you will no longer be a stranger." The elder drew a line of white ash across Royce's forehead, a mark of surrender to the spirits. Without another word, Royce stepped into the canyon alone. The world around him changed. The sound of the tribe faded, replaced by the whisper of the wind and the cry of distant eagles. The sun burned low, and the rocks seemed to shift and breathe. He walked deeper, his shadow stretching long behind him. Visions began to stir in the corners of his mind. He saw flashes of his past, the trading posts, the faces of men he had cheated to survive, the gold coins slipping through his hands. He had come to the Apache lands not for peace, but for profit. That truth now clawed at him like fire under his skin. He fell to his knees, clutching the dust. "I'm not that man anymore," he whispered to no one. "She changed me. I learned your ways. I found meaning." The wind howled in response, carrying a voice that was not his own, deep, ancient, and cold. Truth cannot be learned. It must be lived. Royce lifted his head. A figure stood before him, not of flesh, but of shadow and light, half man, half spirit, the guardian of the canyon. Its eyes burned like coals. "You seek to be one of them," the spirit said, "but your heart carries the stain of greed. Why should their gods accept you?" Royce's voice shook. "Because love made me honest. Not perfect, just honest." The spirit studied him for what felt like an eternity. Then it pointed toward the rising sun. "Then walk toward it. If you speak the truth, it will not blind you." Royce rose, breathing hard, the first light of morning spilling across the canyon walls. He stepped forward, each pace burning into his soul. Behind him, the shadows dissolved. Ahead, the sound of drums returned. The spirits had not taken him. The path had given him back. When Royce emerged from the canyon, the sun was already high, bathing the red cliffs in light. Dust clung to his clothes, his steps heavy but certain. The tribe stood waiting, their faces silent masks of expectation. He crossed the sacred circle and stopped before the elders. The drums had ceased. Even the wind was still. Old Tazi looked upon him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "You returned," he said softly, as if speaking to a ghost. Royce bowed his head. "The spirits showed me my truth. I came here as a traitor, but I remain as a man who belongs not by blood, but by heart." Before the elder could answer, a voice broke through the crowd, Nolan Graves, his face burning with rage. "Lies?" he shouted. "He fooled the spirits just as he fooled us. The proof of his crime still lies hidden." He stormed toward the sacred fire, pulling from his coat a small silver talisman, the same one that had been declared stolen. Gasps spread through the crowd. Royce's eyes widened. He knew that piece. He had seen it in Nolan's tent weeks ago, when he'd been repairing a broken spear. Tazi rose to his full height. "You bring the sacred token to accuse another. How did it come into your hands?" Nolan hesitated. His mouth opened, but no sound came. The people murmured, suspicion spreading like wildfire. Tiona stepped forward, her voice clear and trembling. "I saw it," she said. "He hid it. My uncle feared losing his place among the council if an outsider proved himself worthy. He wanted the trial to end in death." The crowd erupted. Warriors surrounded Nolan as he backed away, his defiance turning to desperation. "You would believe a woman bewitched by a stranger," he spat, but it was too late. Truth had already taken root. Tazi lifted the silver talisman into the sunlight. The polished metal caught the fire's reflection, glowing like molten glass. "The spirits have judged," he declared. "This man," he turned toward Royce, "has walked the shadow path and returned with a clean heart. The liar stands before us." Nolan tried to flee, but the warriors seized him. His protests faded beneath the wind's howl. Carried off into the vast silence of the desert, Royce fell to his knees, exhaustion washing over him. Tiona ran to him, wrapping her arms around his shoulders. The tribe watched in silence, not with anger now, but with reverence. Tazi stepped closer, placing a hand on Royce's head. "From this day, you are no longer an outsider. You are Dehisi, one who walks into worlds." The drums began again, slow, powerful, ancient. As the sun dipped behind the horizon, the fire burned brighter than ever. The tribe danced around it, voices rising in song. Tiona and Royce stood together, hand in hand, the glow of the flames reflected in their eyes. The desert wind carried their story far into the canyons, a story of love that defied law, and truth that burned brighter than fear. Days passed since the trial, yet the fire of that moment still burned within the camp. The tribe had returned to its rhythm, the pounding of drums at sunset, the laughter of children chasing shadows between the tents, the smell of smoke and roasted maize drifting through the wind. But something had changed. Where once Royce Barrett had been the outsider, now he was spoken of in whispers of respect. Men greeted him by name, women offered him water and bread. Even the children followed in, tracing the strange patterns of his beard with curious hands. But it was Tiona who saw the deeper change, the quiet that had settled inside him. The man who had once carried the restlessness of the frontier now moved with the calm of the desert itself. One evening, as the sky bled into crimson and violet, Royce sat beside the sacred fire with Tazi. The elder's eyes reflected the flames. "Weary but wise. You walked the path few among us could survive," Tazi said. "You saw the truth that hides behind fear. That is what makes a man one of us, not his blood, but his courage to face what lies within." Royce nodded. "I came here to trade, to earn." "But she," he looked toward Tiona, who was tending to the children near the tents. "She taught me what worth really means." The elder smiled faintly. "And what will you do now, Dehisi? The one who walks into worlds must choose his path carefully." Royce stared into the fire, the heat warming his face. "I will stay," he said at last, "not as a guest, not as a traitor, but as a man who serves this land." Taji's voice dropped lower. Then remember, the desert gives, but it also tests. The peace you feel now must be guarded. Others beyond the hills will not understand what has happened here. That night, the stars shimmered like silver dust scattered across the sky. Kiona joined him by the fire, resting her head against his shoulder. They sat in silence, the world around them humming with life. You think they'll ever truly see you as one of them? She asked quietly. Royce smiled. Maybe not all, but I don't need all, I just need you. She laughed softly, her fingers brushing against his hand. You always speak like a story. Maybe that's what we are, he said. A story no one will believe. The fire cracked, sending a small spark into the night air, rising, glowing, then fading into darkness. The peace did not last long. 3 nights after the celebration, a rider appeared at the edge of the camp, his horse trembling, its flanks caked in dust. The man wore a blue coat, torn and sun-bleached, the remnants of a soldier's uniform. When he slid from the saddle, the tribe surrounded him, wary but silent. Royce stepped forward. Who are you? The man's lips were cracked, his eyes wild with exhaustion. Name's Colton Reeves, he rasped. The army's coming. Today's south, they're moving toward the river valley. Said there's a settlement here. Said it's harboring thieves and deserters. Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Taji's face hardened. They come with weapons. Colton nodded. And orders. They're clearing every camp they find. The commander thinks you're hiding someone. His gaze flicked toward Royce. A heavy silence followed. Kiona's heart thudded painfully. They'll kill everyone, she whispered. Men, women. Royce clenched his fists. He knew that commander, a man named Briggs, ruthless, ambitious, the kind who saw treaties as obstacles. They won't stop, he said. Not until this place is ash. Taji turned to him. Then what do you suggest, Dehisi? Royce looked around, at the women gathering their children, at the men sharpening spears, at the sacred fire flickering between them. We prepare, he said, not to run, but to stand. Night fell heavy and red that evening. The camp moved with quiet urgency. Fires burned low to hide their glow. Warriors painted their faces in streaks of black and white. Kiona stood beside Royce, tying a strip of cloth around his arm, the mark of the Apachuria defenders. You shouldn't fight, she whispered. They'll see your face. They'll know you're one of them. Royce met her eyes. Then they'll know the truth they refuse to see. Before dawn, he climbed the ridge above the valley. From there, he could already see dust clouds in the distance, the slow, relentless crawl of soldiers across the desert floor. The rising sun painted their bayonets in streaks of gold and blood. Royce stood tall, wind whipping through his hair, his shadow stretching long behind him across the red earth. The drums began below, slow, steady, echoing across the canyon walls. He whispered, almost to himself, let them come. And with that, he turned back toward the camp, toward the people who had become his home. His family, his purpose. The war for peace had begun. The dawn broke red and slow, spilling light across the ridges like blood. From the high cliffs, Royce watched the army form its lines in the valley below. Blue coats moving in rhythm, rifles glinting like rows of mirrors. The drums from the Apache camp echoed up the canyon, deep and steady, a heartbeat of defiance. Smoke from their fires coiled into the pale morning sky. Royce turned to the warriors beside him, men painted in earth tones, their eyes calm and sharp. He saw no fear, only resolve. Taji stood at the front, holding a staff wrapped in eagle feathers. We do not fight to kill, he said quietly. We fight to be remembered. Royce nodded, gripping the bow that had been given to him days before, its wood smooth and dark, carved with symbols of the tribe. He was no longer the merchant who once traded glass for silver. He was a protector now. When the first gunshot cracked through the valley, it shattered the silence like lightning. A plume of dust rose where the bullet struck rock. Then came another, and another. The warriors scattered across the ridges, answering with arrows that hissed through the air like whispers. The soldiers below shouted, disoriented by the echoes that bounced from every wall. Royce crouched behind a stone outcrop, firing again and again, each arrow finding its mark. The air filled with smoke, gunfire, and the raw cry of men. Kiona watched from the camp below, heart pounding with every shot. She moved among the wounded, pressing cloth to bleeding shoulders, whispering prayers under her breath. Then, a scream tore through the canyon. Tazi had fallen. Royce saw it happen, the old man struck by a bullet near the heart, the staff slipping from his hand. Rage surged through him like fire. He leapt from cover, sprinting down the slope through dust and gunfire. Bullets tore the ground around him. But he didn't stop. He reached Tazi, dropped to his knees, and pressed a trembling hand to the elder's chest. Tazi's eyes flickered open. His lips moved, barely forming words. Do not fight with anger. Fight with purpose. And then his breath stilled. The drums faltered. For a moment, everything went quiet. The kind of silence that comes before the earth itself decides to move. Royce rose slowly, gripping the fallen staff. All around him, warriors turned their heads. The fire in their eyes mirrored his own. He lifted the staff high, shouting with all his strength, not in English, but in the tongue Kiona had taught him, for the land, for our people. The canyon roared to life again. The battle raged through the valley like a storm with no sky. Smoke hung heavy in the air, the scent of powder mixing with the dry heat of sand and sweat. Royce led the warriors down from the reach. The elder's staff clutched in his hands like a banner of fire. Bullets whined past his head. He dove behind a fallen log, returning fire with arrows until his quiver was empty. Round him, the cries of men and the thunder of hooves merged into one endless roar. From below, he saw Kiona, running through the chaos, dragging a wounded boy out of the open. The sun caught her hair, turning it to gold against the smoke. For a heartbeat, everything slowed, the sound faded, the world paused. Then a rifle cracked, and the sand exploded near her feet. Royce's heart seized. He broke into a sprint, vaulting over rocks and bodies. He reached her just as another shot tore through the air, grazing his arm, spinning him halfway around. Go, he shouted, pulling her behind a wagon. You have to get to the canyon. Tears streaked her dust-covered face. Not without you. Royce shook his head, pressing the staff into her hands. If anything happens, give this to the council. Tell them Taji's spirit walks with the people now. Before she could protest, a blast ripped through the valley. A cannon, small but deadly, had fired from the soldier's flank, tearing into the ridge. Debris rained down like fire. Royce turned, spotting the crew reloading. He didn't think, he ran. He sprinted through smoke and sand, picking up a fallen rifle. The world around him blurred. The screams, the gunfire, the wind. Only the target ahead remained. He dove forward, tackling the first soldier. The two rolled in the dust, fighting for control of the weapon. Royce slammed the man's arm against the ground until the rifle went off, the bullet tearing into the sky. Another soldier swung a bayonet. Royce dodged, countered, and drove his shoulder into the man's chest, sending him sprawling into the fire pit. Then silence. The cannon crew lay still. The battlefield, for the first time, began to quiet. When he looked up, the soldiers were retreating, blue coats vanishing into the desert haze. The valley slept for the first time in days. The smoke had thinned, the drums had faded, and the wind, once filled with screams, now whispered softly through the sagebrush. Royce woke to the pale light of dawn slipping across the earth. His body ached with the dull weight of survival. Round him, the camp stirred, quiet voices, footsteps, the sound of rebuilding. Children carried buckets of water from the river. Women mended torn hides and tended the wounded. The world was fragile again, like glass newly cooled from fire. Kiona knelt beside him, wrapping a fresh bandage around his arm. Her eyes were heavy with exhaustion, but her hands were steady. You didn't sleep, he said quietly. Neither did you, she answered. A faint smile touched her lips. But you're still breathing. That's enough for now. Royce looked toward the horizon. where the soldiers had disappeared, leaving only broken wheels and scattered footprints. "They'll come back," he said. "Maybe not soon, but they'll always come back." Kiona followed his gaze. "Then we'll be ready. The land remembers those who protect it." Later that day, the council gathered beneath the shade of the red rock cliffs. The sacred staff, once Taji's, stood planted in the ground, its feathers swaying in the warm wind. Royce approached with Kiona at his side. The elders watched in silence, their faces unreadable. An old woman spoke first. "You bled for this land, though it was not your own. You fought beside us, though you could have fled. What is it you ask now, Dehisi?" Royce hesitated. "I asked for nothing, only to stay, to live as one of you, to learn as I still must." The elder nodded slowly. "And the world beyond these hills, it will not forget your name. Men will come searching. Then let them," he said. "They'll find nothing but the desert, and maybe that's enough." There was a pause. Then another elder stepped forward, the youngest among them, carrying Taji's memory in his eyes. "Then it is decided," he said. "The man who walked into worlds now belongs to both." He pressed his hand to Royce's chest, just above the heart. "The fire that once burned against us now burns for us." Kiona's eyes filled with quiet pride. As the sun fell behind the ridge, the tribe gathered for the first peaceful fire since the battle. Songs rose again, not of mourning, but of return. Royce sat beside Kiona, the glow of the flames reflected in their faces. For the first time, he felt the weight of belonging, not because he had earned it, but because he had finally stopped running. Weeks passed, and the desert began to heal. Charred brush gave way to green shoots. The river, once red with dust and ash, ran clear again under the morning sun. Life, as it always did, returned quietly. Royce worked beside the others, gathering stone, repairing the broken fences, helping rebuild what had been torn apart. But his heart was no longer heavy. Each sunrise no longer meant survival, it meant purpose. Sometimes he would ride to the high cliffs at dusk and watch the horizon. Beyond the far hills lay the world he'd once known, the towns, the trade posts, the hunger for gold. It all seemed small now, like a dream from another life. Kiona often joined him there, silent, her gaze fixed on the same fading light. One evening she asked, "If you could go back to the life before me, before all this, would you?" Royce smiled, his eyes never leaving the horizon. "No," he said softly. "That man died the day I crossed this valley." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "Then we'll stay. We'll build what they tried to burn." The seasons turned. The stories spread. Travelers who passed through the valley spoke of a man with a foreign face and Apache eyes, a man who walked between two fires and lived. They said he and the woman of the tribe guarded the sacred ground, where the wind carried songs instead of gunfire. Years later, when strangers came again to the desert, prospectors, soldiers, men who sought what they could never understand, they found only a stone circle near the cliffs. At its center stood a weathered staff, its feathers long turned pale with time. And when the evening wind rose, it whispered to names, faint, almost lost among the dunes. Royce, Kiona. Some said they had gone to live beyond the ridges, where the stars touched the earth. Others swore their spirits still watched over the valley. But for those who listened closely, the truth was simpler. They had become part of the land itself, not outsiders, not ghosts, but the living memory of what love can build when war tries to tear it apart. As the last light of dusk faded, the desert glowed with quiet fire. The story that began with a man tied before a tribe ended, with two souls bound by something greater than blood, by belonging. And the wind, ever faithful, carried their promise across the endless sands. Love does not conquer the world, it becomes it.
The first thing he felt was the rough bite of rope cutting into his wrists. Dust filled his mouth, and the smell of smoke and sweat lingered in the air. When his eyes finally focused, Gideon Pratt realized he was lying in the center of a camp, surrounded by faces painted in war colors. and eyes full of judgment. A circle of Apache warriors stood around him. Some held rifles. Others carried spears carved with family marks. Behind them, the camp buzzed with whispers. Mothers pulling children close. Elders murmuring among themselves. The tension was thick enough to taste. What's this about? Gideon's voice cracked as he tried to sit up, but a boot pushed him back into the dirt. An older man stepped forward, tall, stern, wearing a necklace of bear claws. His gaze was steady, filled with authority. "You are accused," he said slowly, "of stealing the 3 sacred rifles given to our people by treaty. Weapons meant to protect our families. You have broken your word, white man." Gideon's stomach dropped. "That's not true. I never." Before he could finish, another voice cut in, smooth, practiced, and dripping with false concern. "Chief, I saw him myself," said Royce Barrett, a local trader who'd spent months dealing with the tribe. "Found the rifles hidden under his wagon top near the creek. I warned you he couldn't be trusted." Royce's words stung worse than the ropes. Gideon had known the man, even shared campfire whiskey with him. He remembered helping Royce fix a broken axle just a week before. Now that same man was feeding lies into the ears of everyone within reach. The chief looked down at Gideon, silent for a long moment. Then he nodded grimly. "By dawn, the council will decide your fate." The crowd began to disperse, but the whispers grew darker. "Hang him at sunrise," someone muttered. "A thief deserves no mercy." Gideon's chest tightened. He tried to recall every moment from the night before. He remembered leading his horse to the creek, washing the dust from his hands, and then a sudden crack on the back of his head. After that, only darkness. Now he was here, bound, branded a criminal. As night fell, a cold wind swept through the camp. A few torches flickered in the distance, and Gideon could hear the drums from a nearby fire, steady, rhythmic, like a heartbeat counting down his final hours. Then, from the shadows, a quiet voice spoke. "You're not what they say you are." He turned his head. Standing at the edge of the firelight was a young woman, long dark hair braided with feathers, her eyes sharp and thoughtful. "I saw something," she whispered. "And if I'm right, the real thief isn't you." Before Gideon could reply, she stepped back into the dark, leaving only the echo of her words and the faintest spark of hope. The morning sun rose red over the horizon, spilling its light across the camp. The fires had burned low, leaving thin trails of smoke curling into the sky. Gideon hadn't slept. The ropes still dug into his wrists, and his shoulders ached from being tied all night. Every sound, the snort of a horse, the cry of a hawk, reminded him that each minute brought him closer to a verdict he didn't deserve. When he lifted his head, he saw her again, the young woman from the night before. She was walking between the tents, carrying a bowl of water. For a moment, their eyes met. She hesitated, then approached. "Drink," she said softly, holding the bowl to his lips. He drank greedily, the water tasting of smoke and clay. "You said you saw something," he whispered, careful not to draw attention from the nearby guards. "What did you mean?" Her gaze shifted toward the edge of the camp, where Royce Barrett stood talking to 2 warriors, his voice smooth and confident. "Last night," she said quietly, "I saw him near the wagon. He thought no one was watching. He hid something under your top, long metal barrels wrapped in cloth." Gideon's heart pounded. "You're sure?" She nodded. "I know what rifles look like. My father trained me to shoot." Before Gideon could answer, one of the guards barked something in Apache, motioning for her to step back. She obeyed but gave Gideon one last look, a look that said, "Don't give up yet." Royce noticed the exchange. He walked over, wearing that same easy smile he always used to sell lies. "Morning, cowboy," he drawled. "Hope you slept well. You'll need your strength. The chief's council meets soon." Gideon stared at him, jaw clenched. "You set me up, Barrett. I don't know why, but I'll see you hang for it." Royce laughed lightly, brushing the dust from his vest. You won't see anything after today." He turned and strode away, leaving Gideon seething but powerless. A few minutes later, the camp began to stir with purpose. Men gathered near the council fire, women brought food, and the sound of drums slowly filled the air. The trial, if one could call it that, was about to begin. From across the camp, the chief's daughter watched quietly, her face unreadable. She could stay silent and let the tribe deliver judgment. Or she could risk everything by speaking against a white trader her people trusted. The sun climbed higher, throwing sharp shadows across the camp. Dust rose with every step of the warriors as they formed a circle once more. Gideon was pulled to his feet and dragged forward. The crowd murmured, anger, suspicion, fear. In that moment, he caught Nola's eyes again. And though her lips didn't move, he could read the message written there as clearly as any words. Hold on. I will not let them kill an innocent man. The council fire roared to life in the center of the camp, its flames licking at the dry air. The warriors formed a wide circle, faces painted red and white, their eyes fixed on Gideon. The chief sat at the head of the gathering, a carved staff resting across his knees. His expression was solemn, neither anger nor mercy, only duty. Gideon stood before them, hands still bound, sweat running down his temples. Every instinct in him screamed to fight, to run, but there was nowhere to go. The tribe's gaze was heavy, and the desert sun made the world shimmer like a fever dream. Royce Barrett stepped forward, holding a piece of torn canvas. One. Gideon recognized instantly as part of his wagon top. Chief, he began in that smooth, poisonous voice. This came from his wagon. Beneath it, I found the sacred rifles you were promised. He planned to sell them to raiders for gold. That's why he came here, not as a friend, but as a thief. The crowd murmured angrily. Gideon tried to speak, but one of the guards pushed him back with the butt of a spear. That's a lie. Gideon shouted, voice hoarse. Someone hit me from behind. I woke up tied like this. Barrett planted those rifles himself. Royce shook his head slowly, as though pitying a madman. You see how he twists the truth, Chief? He would blame anyone to save his own neck. The chief's eyes narrowed. He turned toward Gideon. You bring no proof, only words. I have nothing left to show, Gideon said, his voice breaking. But I've never stolen a damn thing in my life. The wind picked up, carrying dust and tension alike. The drumming stopped. Silence fell over the circle, heavy, suffocating silence. The chief rose to his feet. Then the council will decide. When the sun reaches the top of the sky. Wait. The voice rang out clear and strong. All heads turned. Nola stepped forward, her posture firm, her chin lifted. Her dark hair glimmered in the sunlight, feathers trembling with each breath. The chief's expression changed, surprise, maybe even fear, but he said nothing. I have something to say, she declared. Royce's smile flickered for the first time. Nola, he said smoothly, this is no place for. Be silent, she cut him off, her voice like the snap of a whip. The crowd stirred. No one spoke to Barrett that way, not even warriors twice her age. Nola looked at her father, then at Gideon. I saw this man attacked, she said, near the creek, the night before the rifles vanished. And I saw Royce Barrett near his wagon, hiding something beneath it. I said nothing before, because I feared to bring shame to our tribe if I was wrong. But now I see, staying silent would bring greater shame. The camp erupted in shocked whispers. Royce tried to laugh, but his voice faltered. You're mistaken, girl. You think you saw. I know what I saw. The chief raised a hand, and the camp fell quiet once more. He looked between his daughter and the trembling trader. The camp was silent, not the calm kind of silence, but the heavy one that comes before a storm. Every eye was fixed on Nola. Even the wind seemed to pause. She stood tall in the sunlight, unflinching beneath the stares of her people, and the burning anger of the man she had just accused. Royce Barrett broke the silence first. She's lying, he barked, his voice cracking slightly. You'd trust the words of a girl over a man, who's traded fair with your tribe for months. But his calm facade was slipping. Sweat glistened on his forehead. His hand twitched near the pistol, at his hip before he remembered that no one here would let him touch it. The chief slowly rose to his feet. The golden light of the sun caught the beads and feathers woven into his hair. My daughter has never lied, he said firmly, his deep voice echoing through the camp. But truth must be proven, for both men. He motioned to two warriors. Search the trader's wagon. Royce's eyes widened for a fraction of a second, then he forced a smile. "Of course, Chief. You'll find nothing but honest trade goods. Go ahead." The warriors marched toward his wagon, disappearing behind the row of tents. The crowd murmured, voices rising and falling like the wind. Gideon stood motionless, heart pounding. This was his only chance. Nola moved closer to him, whispering, "If they find anything, it will end today." He nodded, still not trusting himself to speak. A few tense minutes passed. Then, from the far side of the camp, a shout, sharp, urgent. The crowd turned as one. The two warriors returned, carrying a bundle wrapped in cloth. They threw it to the ground before the chief. When the cloth unraveled, the sun flashed against polished metal, the stolen rifles. The crowd erupted. Angry voices clashed, some shouting in Apache, others in disbelief. Gideon stared at the weapons, a wave of relief washing over him so fast it nearly made him dizzy. Royce stepped back, stammering, That's impossible. Someone must have." The chief cut him off with a raised hand. "Enough." His voice carried the weight of mountains. "You said these rifles were found under the cowboy's top." Royce's mouth opened, but no words came. The chief's eyes darkened. "And now they are in your wagon." The crowd fell silent again, this time with rage instead of confusion. Several warriors stepped forward, their faces hard as stone. Royce backed away, voice trembling now. "Listen, this isn't what it looks like. You're making a mistake." A spearhead touched his chest. The chief said quietly, "The mistake was trusting you." Gideon looked at Nola. For the first time since he'd woken tired and accused. His eyes softened. Gratitude, and something deeper, flickered there. But the moment was short-lived. From the edge of the camp, a voice shouted in English, "Riders coming." Dozens of heads turned toward the horizon. Dust was rising, a fast-moving group on horseback, silhouetted against the sun. Royce's expression changed instantly. The thunder of hooves grew louder, rolling across the plains like a gathering storm. Dust clouds rose behind the riders, half a dozen men, armed, fast, ruthless. The glint of sunlight on their rifles told the story before anyone could speak. These weren't rescuers. They were hired guns. Panic rippled through the camp. Mothers pulled their children toward the shelters. Warriors grabbed rifles and bows. The chief barked orders in his native tongue, his calm authority steadying the chaos. Royce Barrett grinned, the fear gone from his face. "You see, Chief, you don't want trouble. Let me walk away, and my men will ride on." The chief's eyes narrowed. "You brought this trouble here." He gestured to two warriors. "Bind him." Royce tried to step back, but a spear caught his shoulder, forcing him down to his knees. His smirk twisted into a snarl. "You fools, you'll all be dead before sundown." The riders drew closer, 50 yards, maybe less now. Dust whipped through the camp. Gideon turned to the chief. "Untie me," he said. The chief glanced at him coldly. "You expect me to arm a man we nearly hanged?" "If you don't," Gideon said, voice firm, "you won't have time to change your mind." For a moment, no one moved. Then Nola stepped forward, cutting the ropes from his wrists with a knife hidden beneath her sash. "He saved no one yet," she said, "but I believe he will." Gideon rubbed his raw wrists, grabbed a rifle from a nearby post, and checked the chamber. "Where's your cover?" The chief pointed to the ridge behind the camp. "We fight here. This is our ground." The riders burst into view, shouting, firing warning shots into the air. Bullets snapped past tents and fire pits. The first warrior dropped, clutching his shoulder. "Take them." Royce shouted from where he knelt, grinning like a devil. Gideon dove behind a wagon. Firing once, the shot hitting a rider square in the chest. The man tumbled from his horse. "They're mercenaries." Gideon yelled, "They won't stop unless he's dead." The chief nodded sharply. "Then we make it so." Warriors fired in unison, arrows slicing the air. Horses reared. Chaos broke out. The camp turned into a battlefield of dust, flame, and shouts. Gideon moved like a man reborn, every instinct sharpened by desperation and purpose. Nola ducked behind a rock, loading a rifle with calm precision. When one rider aimed toward her, Gideon's shot came first, sending the man crashing from his saddle. She looked back at him, a flicker of trust passing between them like lightning. Then, over the chaos, came Royce's desperate scream. He had wriggled free from his guards and was running toward his men. "Fall back," he shouted. "We'll regroup." A single gunshot rang out. One of the tribe's warriors fired, hitting the ground inches from his boots. Royce froze, hands raised, face pale. The riders, seeing their leader trapped, turned and galloped away, vanishing into the horizon with a trail of dust. The battle was over, but the air still smelled of gunpowder and fear. Smoke drifted lazily over the Apache camp as the last echoes of gunfire faded into the plains. The wounded were tended to in silence, quiet, efficient movements of people who had seen death before but still mourned every loss. Gideon stood near the broken wagon, his shirt torn and streaked with dirt and blood that wasn't all his own. His hands trembled slightly as he reloaded a rifle, out of habit, an old instinct, from too many gunfights. But there were no more enemies coming, only judgment. Royce Barrett knelt in the dust before the chief's tent, wrists bound, face pale and bruised. His once perfect white shirt was streaked with mud. The man who had smiled so confidently that morning now looked small, smaller than the lies he had built. The chief stood tall before him, his staff planted firmly in the ground. Around them, the tribe gathered in a wide circle, silent but fierce, waiting for the decision that would define justice. "You came to us in peace," the chief began, his voice deep and calm. "You traded goods, told stories, shared fire. And all the while, you built a trap for our people." Royce tried to lift his chin. "I did business," he hissed. "That's what men like me do. You wouldn't even have those rifles if it weren't for me." The chief's expression didn't change, but something ancient and heavy moved behind his eyes. "And you would have taken our land for it." He turned to the crowd. "He forged papers. He stole our weapons. He planned to sell our homes to men who will never bleed for this soil." A murmur rippled through the people. Anger, grief, the raw ache of betrayal. Gideon watched, feeling the tension twist inside him. He wanted to see justice done, but also feared what that might mean. He had seen lynchings before, seen men hanged without a trial, and he didn't want another man to die this way, even one as vile as Royce Barrett. "Chief," he said, stepping forward, voice steady but cautious, "you deserve justice, but not vengeance. Let the law hang him, not the fire." The chief looked at him long and hard. The warriors tensed, waiting. "You speak for the law," the chief said finally. "But whose law? The same law that forgot our treaties." Gideon hesitated. There was no easy answer. "No," he said quietly. "The law that remembers what's right." The silence stretched for several seconds. Then, surprisingly, Nola spoke. "Father," she said softly, "you taught me that mercy is stronger than revenge. The fire burns fast, but truth lasts longer." Her words drifted through the air like smoke, touching every heart in the circle. The chief closed his eyes for a moment, then nodded. "Then let truth stand." He faced Gideon. "You will take him to the territorial marshal. You will speak for what happened here, for all of us." Gideon's eyes widened. "You're trusting me." The chief gave a small, solemn smile. "You fought beside us. Trust is earned in fire." The sun was low and cruel as Gideon Pratt rode west with Royce Barrett, bound to the saddle behind him. The two horses moved slow under the weight of heat and silence. The desert stretched out in every direction, endless, golden, and merciless. Behind them, the Apache camp was just a faint line on the horizon. Ahead lay 50 miles of empty land before they'd reach the nearest town, and the territorial marshal who'd decide Royce's fate. For a long while, neither man spoke. Only the steady clop of hooves and the whisper of the wind broke the silence. Finally, Royce laughed bitterly. "So this is it? You think you're some kind of hero now, bringing me to justice?" Gideon didn't look back, just doing what's right. "Right." Royce spat the word like it tasted sour. "You think they care about right? The marshal, the landowners, the politicians, they'll shake my hand before they shake yours. You're nothing but a drifter with dirt on his boots." Gideon's jaw tightened. "Maybe, but I'm the one riding free." Royce smirked. "For now." The trail wound through red canyons, the light fading to amber. Gideon's mind drifted to the faces in the camp, to Nola's words echoing in his head. Mercy is stronger than revenge. He wasn't sure he believed it yet, but he wanted to. By dusk, they reached a dry riverbed. Gideon dismounted, pulling Royce from his horse and tying him to a nearby tree. He built a small fire, the last orange glow before the desert swallowed the day. Royce watched him, smirking through cracked lips. You could have ridden off, you know. Left me for the coyotes. Saved yourself the trouble. Gideon didn't answer. He just stared into the flames, the firelight reflecting in his tired eyes. Royce leaned forward, his tone turning sharper. You think they'll thank you for this? The Indians, the law, the world? You'll be forgotten before the week's out. But me, he smiled, the arrogance still flickering. They'll talk about me, the man who fooled a whole tribe. Gideon turned his gaze toward him, the look cold and heavy. You didn't fool them. You just never understood them. Royce's smile faltered. And what makes you think you do? Gideon threw another branch into the fire, watching sparks twist up into the night sky. Because I saw what you never could, honor. Something you can't buy, steal, or fake. Royce looked away, the flames flickering across his face. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself. The desert night deepened. Coyotes howled somewhere far off. Gideon lay awake, hat over his eyes, one hand resting on his revolver. He didn't trust the silence, or the man bound across from him. And he was right not to. Just before dawn, Royce began working the ropes with a sharp stone he had hidden in his sleeve. Slowly, carefully, the fibers began to fray. He glanced at Gideon, still, motionless, and smiled faintly. But as the last strand snapped, Gideon's voice came from the darkness. I wouldn't do that if I were you. By the third day, the desert turned into scrubland, and the scrubland into something that pretended to be civilization. A crooked sign read, Silverton, 3 miles. It wasn't much of a town, just a stretch of sun-bleached buildings, a saloon, a jailhouse, and the kind of silence that made you check your back every few steps. Gideon rode slow, the dust of the trail still clinging to his coat. Royce Barrett sat slumped and bound behind him, eyes hidden under his hat brim. The people in town looked up as they passed, curious, suspicious, the way small towns always were when trouble came riding in. At the sheriff's office, Gideon dismounted and pushed the door open. The cool shade smelled of whiskey and old paper. Behind a desk sat Marshal Henry Tulliver, a thick man with silver hair and a gaze that had long since stopped caring. Morning, Gideon said, pulling Royce forward. Got a prisoner for you. Name's Royce Barrett. Caught stealing government rifles and forging treaties with the Apache. The marshal raised an eyebrow, chewing on a toothpick. That's so. He leaned back, boots on the desk. And who might you be? Gideon Pratt, he said. Used to ride for the Territorial Scouts. I've got witnesses, an entire tribe ready to speak. The marshal smirked. A tribe, huh? Ain't exactly the kind of testimony that holds weight round here. Gideon's jaw tightened. You're saying their word means nothing? I'm saying, the marshal said slowly, that men like Barrett here tend to have friends in high places. You, on the other hand. He gave Gideon a long look. You got the look of a man nobody's vouching for. Royce chuckled softly. Told you, cowboy. The world runs on paper and profit, not on your kind of justice. Gideon stepped forward, slamming a folder of papers onto the desk, the forged treaty Nola had recovered. This is proof. You turn your back on it, you're no better than him. The marshal picked up the document, turned it over once, then set it down. You bringing me a headache, son. Tell you what, I'll keep him here for now. We'll look into it. You head back west, forget this ever happened. Gideon's hand hovered near his revolver, not out of anger, but out of sheer disbelief. You're gonna let him walk, aren't you? The marshal met his eyes. No emotion, no shame. Ain't my call. Comes from higher up. Man's got property, friends, influence. You got dust. For a long second, Gideon said nothing. Then he nodded slowly. I've seen this kind of justice before. He turned to leave, but Royce's mocking voice followed him out the door. You can't win, Pratt. You never could. Outside, the town looked quieter than before, as if the sun itself had dimmed. Gideon stood there on the wooden porch, staring down the street. His hand clenched into a fist. He had fought for the truth in the desert. Now he'd have to fight for it in the light of day. The cell door clanged shut behind Royce Barrett, echoing like the final word in a lie. Marshal Tulliver slipped the keys into his vest pocket, already pouring himself another glass of whiskey. "You did your duty, Pratt," he said lazily. "Now let the law handle it." Gideon stared through the bars at Royce, who leaned casually against the wall. That smug grin carved across his face again. "The law?" Gideon said quietly. "You mean your drinking buddy's payroll?" The marshal's eyes hardened. "Careful, son. You're in my town now." But Gideon didn't back down. He'd faced rifles, raids, and deserts. A crooked badge didn't scare him. He turned to leave. Just don't let him vanish before dawn. Outside, the streets of Silverton glowed with late afternoon light. Dust hung like gold in the air, but everything felt wrong. The world was pretending to be peaceful again, hiding its rot behind wooden walls and clean boots. Gideon walked to the saloon, ordered water, and sat in the corner, watching the sunlight fade across the floorboards. His mind raced. Every instinct screamed that Royce wouldn't spend the night behind bars. Men like him never did. Then the piano stopped. The room fell oddly quiet. From the swinging doors stepped 3 riders, clean coats, polished guns, and the kind of confidence that smelled like money. They didn't look at anyone except the sheriff's office. Gideon's heart sank. They're here for him. He slipped out the side door, boots silent on the dirt. The sun was nearly gone, bleeding orange and red across the sky. From the shadows of the jailhouse, he saw the marshal greet the men, shaking hands, exchanging envelopes. Moments later, the back door opened. 2 of the men led Royce out, free, smirking beneath the brim of a new hat. That was the last straw. Gideon stepped forward, cocking his revolver. "You walk one more step, Barrett, and I'll make sure you crawl the rest of your life." Everyone froze. Dust drifted through the still air. The men reached for their guns, but before anyone could draw, a voice cut through the silence. "Drop them." It came from behind. Gideon turned slightly, and there she was, Nola, mounted on a horse, cloak pulled back, bow drawn tight. Behind her, 4 Apache warriors, faces painted, eyes sharp. The men hesitated. The marshal's fake calm cracked like glass. Gideon exhaled in disbelief. "You followed me all the way here." Nola didn't lower her bow. "You carried our truth. We came to carry yours." The street fell silent, save for the whine of the wind between the buildings. Royce sneered. "You think this changes anything? You're still outnumbered, outgunned." Before he could finish, an arrow sliced past his ear and buried itself in the post beside him. Nola's voice was cold steel. "Try lying again." Gideon moved closer, revolver steady. "You wanted to buy justice, Barrett. Now you get to earn it." The marshal stepped forward, hand shaking. "You can't just take him. This is official business." The sun was barely above the horizon when Gideon, Nola, and their small escort of warriors rode back into the Apache camp. The same wind that once carried suspicion now carried silence, heavy, expectant, alive. Children peeked out from tents. Warriors stood tall but calm. The chief waited near the great fire, the morning light catching the beads in his hair. Royce Barrett, bound and bruised, stumbled forward under Gideon's grip. His fine clothes were torn, his arrogance stripped away. The man who once manipulated entire towns now looked like what he truly was, small, hollow, and afraid. Gideon stopped a few steps from the fire. "He's yours," he said simply. The chief regarded Royce for a long moment before speaking. "You were given our trust. You broke it. You tried to sell our land, the land of our ancestors, for silver." He raised his staff slightly. "The law of men failed. But here, our words still mean something." Royce sneered through split lips. "You think this is justice? You'll hang me and call it honor." The chief's gaze didn't waver. "No, death would free you. We will let truth judge you instead." He nodded to Nola, who stepped forward and held up. the forged treaty and a pouch of silver. Coins, proof of every lie Royce told. The crowd murmured, voices low but fierce. Gideon felt the heat of the fire on his face, the sound of the wind in the silence that followed. He'd seen trials before, in courtrooms, in taverns, in alleys, but never one that felt this pure. There were no lawyers, no lies written in ink, only the truth of what a man had done and who he'd hurt. The chief turned toward Gideon. You carried him here. You fought beside us. What say you, outsider? What is his punishment? Gideon hesitated. He looked at Royce, then at the people around him. He thought of the marshals, the corrupt town, the papers no one would ever read. Finally, he spoke, voice steady, low, but clear. Let him live, so he can see the world he tried to sell fall apart around him. Let him walk as the man who lost everything, his name, his deals, his pride. That's a longer sentence than any rope can give. The crowd murmured again, this time with respect. The chief studied Gideon, then nodded. So it will be. Royce spat into the dust, shaking his head. You think you've won, Pratt? You'll die in this desert like the rest of them. You'll be forgotten. Gideon looked at him, calm and tired. Maybe, but I'll die free. Two warriors stepped forward, cutting Royce's ropes, but not his freedom. They pushed him away from the camp, forcing him to walk east, alone, toward the rising sun and the empty miles ahead. For a long time, no one spoke. The fire crackled. The world felt clean again. Then Nola turned to Gideon. You could have asked for blood, she said softly, but you gave him something worse. Gideon nodded. I've seen enough graves. It's time someone lived with what they've done. The campfire burned lower as the sun climbed higher, washing the desert in pale gold. The night's chill faded, and with it, the echoes of judgment. Gideon stood at the edge of the camp, his saddle slung over one shoulder, hat pulled low against the light. Behind him, the Apache village was waking, laughter mixed with the clatter of pots, and the soft chatter of morning life, sounds he hadn't heard here since the day he first arrived. Bound and accused. Now, he was free. Truly free. Nola approached quietly, leading his horse. You're leaving, she said. It wasn't a question. He smiled faintly. Seems I always do. She stopped beside him, looking out over the vast open land, the red rocks, the dry riverbeds, the world stretching endlessly toward the horizon. You could stay, she said. You've earned a place here. Gideon was silent for a long moment. The thought had crossed his mind, to stop running, to live among people who still believed in honor. But he knew the truth. Men like him carried the road inside them. He finally said, if I stay, I'll bring my ghosts with me. Out there, he nodded toward the desert, they fade with the dust. Nola studied him, then smiled softly. Maybe one day, when you've outrun them all, you'll find your way back. He looked at her, the strength in her eyes, the calm in her voice, and felt something shift inside him, something he hadn't felt in years. Maybe, he said. And if I don't, tell your father I was grateful. She nodded once, stepping closer. He already knows. For a moment, neither moved. The wind picked up, lifting strands of her dark hair and scattering the ashes of last night's fire into the air. They looked like sparks drifting toward the sun. Then Gideon took the reins, mounted up, and turned his horse toward the horizon. He didn't look back, not because he didn't want to, but because he knew if he did, he might never leave. The tribe watched in silence as he rode away. The chief stood with Nola at his side, eyes narrowed against the light. He walks the hard road, the chief said quietly. Nola nodded. But it's the one that leads home, someday. Far ahead, Gideon rode through the shimmering heat. The land stretched out forever, red dust, blue sky, a single figure on horseback cutting across the endless plain. He reached the ridge, paused, and glanced back one last time. From that distance, the campfire was only a flicker, a memory of warmth against the wild. He tipped his hat toward it. Then he rode on, the sound of hooves fading into the open silence of the desert. The screen of the sky swallowed him, leaving only wind, sun, and the promise that truth, once spoken, never truly dies.